I'm cutting dovetails today, but with a technique I've never used before. Can I just say, before we get busy, that you guys are the freaking best. The amount of positivity that has come about from the comment section, from emails, from DMs, I really deeply appreciate you guys. It's been wonderful so far. And currently, I'm drinking a hot brew from a company called Henry's House of Coffee out in San Francisco. A random email I got one day from a fan of the channel, and he was like, hey, I love your work. I know you love coffee. I'd love to send you some coffee that I make personally, just on the house. No, not apropos of nothing. And not a couple of days later, I got another email. Hey, I love the mug. I make face mugs too. Come on. Tarpley Studios crushing the game and sending it to me on the house. Handmade objects, guys. The community that's being gathered here is really, really wonderful. So I want to say thank you, and I appreciate all of the support that you guys have shown already. Hopefully I'll continue to make content that meets your expectations. But for now, on to dovetails. So here's the deal. The time has come for me to make some drawers. I've got one here, I've got two on the interior, and from the very beginning, my plan was to make these drawers the same way I normally make all of my drawers, which is a pinned rabbet. It's sleek, it's sexy, it's fast. You use some brass rod for those pins, and it looks beautiful. However, the more I sat with this piece over the last week or so after it's been glued up and looking at the tails and the thought of pulling this drawer out and seeing a pinned rabbet, that feels dissonant, that doesn't feel cohesive, it feels unintentional, and that's not what we want. We want an object that feels like every part of it matters. And so, almost in spite of myself, I've decided that I need to dovetail these drawers. But I also wanted to employ a new technique because, number one, expansion of skill set is always a good thing. And number two, if you saw the video I made recently about surface prep and planing this material specifically, you'll know that it was kind of a pain in the butt to work with hand tools. So, I decided I'm going to cut them on the bandsaw. Now, the angle that I use for these tails is important. I use a 1:6 ratio. Kind of the traditional thought is 1:6 for softwoods, 1:8 for hardwoods, because you don't need as steep a tail on hardwoods as you do on softwoods. But this is kind of getting into old school functional dovetails where you're really relying on the strength of the joinery itself to hold that joint together rather than the strength of the glue in the joint. And personally, I just think that 1:6 looks a little more dovetaily than 1:8, but that's just a me thing. Feel free to disagree. For those of you who are interested, that sits somewhere around 9.5 degrees. But knowing that it is 1:6 is very helpful because then I can make a jig at my angle using the same 1:6 ratio. Now, very briefly, what I mean when I say 1:6 simply means that this ratio is 1 inch over and 6 inches up, and whatever angle that creates is the angle of my dovetail. 1:8 would be 1 inch over, 8 inches up, so it's slightly shallower because of that longer angle. That's all that means. So I've got one jig at 1:6, and I've got a second jig at 1:6, but in the opposite direction. Now you can see how insanely crude these jigs are, but if you've seen some of my earlier videos, you know how I feel about complicated, beautiful, precise jigs. These are, in my opinion, means to an end. That's all they are. Again, feel free to disagree with me on any of this. And if you enjoy making jigs, make the most beautiful jig you've ever made in your life. Go experience that. Go push your craftsmanship to a higher level making jigs. Personally, for me, it's just not a thing that I really enjoy that much, so I make the simplest, crudest jigs that I can in order to get the job done so I can make the object rather than the tool. So, everything is looking good. My tailboards are nice and clean right off the bandsaw. Cleaned them up a little bit just with a chisel, cleaned up those shoulders, and transferred my lines to my pin board. So all things being equal, it's now time to hog out the waist on my pin board. All I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut my shoulders in with a handsaw, and then I'm going to use a router to remove the vast majority of my waist. You've heard me preach the gospel on this router before. This is maybe my favorite router on the market, regardless of the scale of the joinery I'm doing. I use this for everything, and I'm gonna use it on this. Now, is it atypical to use a router to hog out the waist on a half-blind dovetail? Absolutely. Did I invent it? No, I'm sure other people have done it before. This is just, I kind of invented this for myself, I should say, during the pandemic, and it works really well, especially on material that's difficult to work with hand tools. I'm not saying it's the best way. I'm certainly not saying it's the only way. What I'm saying is, for me, in this particular application on half blinds, it seems to be the fastest way. Our tails are looking good. Honestly, at this point, they look perfectly on par with hand-cut dovetails, which one could make the argument that they still are hand-cut given that they were passed through a machine by hand, but I'm getting off track here. Couple of things of note. Number one, this cherry that I'm using for the front of these drawers, equally as troublesome as the maple that I'm using for the main box. For some context, folks ask me often, how much do I sharpen? How often do I sharpen my tools? And the question is, it's entirely dependent on what you're doing and how often you need to sharpen. In the process of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pin sockets, I sharpen my chisels 3 times. This is gummy cherry. It very clearly has a lot of things going on in it, for better or for worse. It's gonna be beautiful, but it can be a pain in the butt to work with. Now, the next step is to start working on the back and the bottom, but I've got 3 drawers in this cabin, not just 2, and the rest of these processes are going to be identical no matter the size of the drawer. So before I do that, I'm gonna cut the dovetails in the other drawer. So, I've got all 3 drawers dovetailed together, and all I really need to do now is run the groove for the bottom and the dado for the back. Now, with our bottom in place and everything looking good, the last thing I need to do is to actually set the back in. So, in order to create a stopped dado that ends where the drawer bottom exists, I'm gonna break out this bad boy again. And that, friends, that's drawer making 101. That is, well, a few things before we get out of here. Firstly, on the dovetail method itself, the bandsaw method, I am looking at these tails and I see no differential between what I cut and what I would have cut by hand. They look excellent straight off the bandsaw. A method I may employ more often now. That was really quite simple and to very adequate results. So I'm very happy with that. Number two, the method of drawer making and assembling that you saw using the dadoed in back is really, really helpful. I like to have this bottom protrude through so that when I assemble, I can just slide it right in. I can glue my dovetails together and then I can slide my bottom in and then I can glue together the actual back and slide it in place. Throw like 2 clamps on it and it's done. You can, of course, leave the expansion in the front and nail or screw the bottom to the back piece. That's absolutely a thing that you can do. And then that way, to replace the bottom, all you have to do is take a couple of screws out and slide it out. I've found over the years that there's no real reason to do that. I've never had to replace the bottom yet. And so normally what I do is I glue it in the front and then I let all of the expansion and contraction happen toward the back. That's just my 2 cents from the peanut gallery, so take that for what it's worth. But other than that, now it's time to get to surface prep and get these glued up and fitted into the actual cabinet so that I can continue onward towards the finish line. So that's what I'm gonna go do now, friends. I hope this was helpful. I hope it was interesting. I hope it was educational. I hope it was entertaining to some degree. And as always, get out, go make a thing, go have some fun doing it. And until next week, cheers.